The night was still in the ancient land of Ur. The stars glittered across the sky like scattered diamonds, and a quiet wind moved through the tents. Among them sat a man, deep in thought, his heart full of questions about life and truth. His name was Abraham, though at that time people still called him Abram. He was known for his calm strength, but inside, something stirred. All around him, people bowed to idols. They prayed to figures of wood and stone, shaped by human hands. He had watched his father, Terah, carve them for years, polishing their faces and decorating their shrines. People would bring gifts and incense, kneeling before the same statues that could neither hear nor move. Every time Abraham saw them, something inside him whispered, "This cannot be right. How could these lifeless objects be gods? How could they control the sun, the rain, the wind?" He often slipped away at night, climbing the small hills outside the city to stare at the sky. The moon glowed silver. The stars stretched far beyond sight. He would whisper, "Who made all this? Who gave me breath?" And one night, the question was answered, not through thunder, not through dreams, but through a calm, commanding voice that filled the silence around him and the space within him. "Abram," the voice said. He froze. The world seemed to stop breathing. "Leave your country, your family, and your father's house, and go to the land I will show you. I will bless you and make your name great." Abraham's heart pounded. Leave? Leave his home, his people, his father? Everything familiar? He looked toward the stars, trembling. "Lord, where would I go? I don't even know the way." There was no map, no direction. Only that voice, full of peace and power. The next morning, the sun rose over the desert, warm and golden. Abraham walked among his tents, the smell of firewood and dust in the air. He saw his father's tools, the idols on the shelves, the servants feeding the animals. Everything around him was safe, yet his soul couldn't stay. When he told his wife, Sarah, she was silent for a while. The flickering light from the lamp touched her face as she said softly, "You mean we're leaving? Leaving all this?" He nodded. "Yes, God spoke to me." Her eyes filled with quiet confusion. "Where will we go?" "I don't know," Abraham said, "but I know who's leading us." There was a pause. Then she smiled, faint but full of faith. "If he called you," she said, "then I will follow." That was the beginning. They packed what they could, their tents, flocks, servants, and turned their backs on Ur. Behind them were idols and comfort. Ahead lay only faith. Each step away from the city was a step into trust. At night, Abraham would stop to rest, staring up at the endless sky. The same stars that once filled him with questions now seemed to whisper, "You are not alone." Days turned into weeks. They crossed dry valleys and windy plains. Sarah often walked beside him, silent but strong. Sometimes she would ask, "Are we close?" Abraham would smile gently. "Every step brings us closer, not to a place, but to his promise." When they reached the land of Canaan, the Lord spoke again. "To your offspring, I will give this land." Abraham built an altar there, stones from the earth, and bowed his head in gratitude. But this faith would be tested. Back in Ur, his father's anger burned when he learned what Abraham had done. Before leaving, Abraham had gone to the temple and broken all the idols, except the biggest one. He had placed the hammer in its hand. When the people saw the destruction, they shouted, "Who has done this to our gods?" Someone said, "It was Abraham, the one who speaks against them." They dragged him before the king, Nimrod, who was known for his pride and power. Nimrod glared down at him. "Abraham, why have you insulted our gods?" Abraham answered calmly, "I did not insult them. Ask the big one. The hammer is in his hand." Laughter rippled through the crowd, then silence. Everyone knew the truth, that idols could not speak. Nimrod's face turned red with fury. "You mock me. You mock our gods. I will burn you alive so that your God may save you, if he can." A great fire was built. Flames roared, reaching toward the sky. People gathered from miles away to see the punishment. The heat was so fierce they could not go near. Abraham stood, hands tied but his face calm. In his heart he whispered, "God is enough for me. There is no God but Him. In Him I put my trust." They threw him into the fire. And in that moment, the command of God came. "O fire, be cool and safe for Abraham." The flames lost their fury. The smoke turned gentle. The crowd gasped. Abraham stood unharmed, his ropes burned away, his face shining with peace. When he stepped out, the people stared in awe. Nimrod was speechless. That day, many hearts trembled, for they had seen what true power looked like. Abraham walked away from the ashes. He didn't look back. He knew now that obedience to God was worth any cost. The journey ahead was long, but his heart was free. As they continued their travels, Sarah sometimes looked at him and said, "Abraham, do you ever miss home?" He smiled softly. "Home isn't where I came from, Sarah. It's where God leads us." There were nights when the road was hard. Hunger, thirst, and loneliness pressed on them. Sometimes, he would see the glow of other tribes' fires in the distance and feel the ache of isolation. But then he'd look up at the stars again, those silent witnesses, and remember the voice that called him. One evening he prayed, "Lord, you asked me to leave everything. I have nothing left but you, and yet I feel richer than I ever was." And in his heart, he felt a whisper, "You are not alone. From you will come nations that remember my name." Tears filled his eyes. He looked at Sarah and said, "He has promised. Though we are few, he sees us." Sarah smiled, resting her head against his shoulder. "Then let's keep walking." Years passed. Abraham's journey became a story, not of loss, but of discovery. Every hardship taught him that faith is not about knowing every answer, but trusting through every silence. He would later stand on a hill, watching the horizon glow red at sunset, and whisper to himself, "I left everything behind, but gained the only thing that matters, the nearness of God." And that night, as the stars appeared again, countless and bright, he understood something deeper. Faith begins not when everything makes sense, but when you follow God even when nothing does. Abraham didn't yet know that from his line would come prophets, kings, and nations, and that people across the world would call him the friend of God. But that night, under the quiet sky, he was simply a man who believed. And belief, pure, fearless belief, was enough to change the world forever. The desert was quiet again. A soft wind moved through the tents, carrying the smell of sand and sheep. Abraham sat outside, his face turned toward the night sky. The stars shimmered above him, countless, eternal, and yet, tonight, they felt like silent witnesses to his thoughts. He had come far since the day he left his homeland. He had crossed deserts, built altars, faced kings, and seen miracles. But even faith, as strong as his, had its moments of stillness, those deep, silent questions that rise when the world grows quiet. He looked toward the tent where Sarah slept. She had grown older now, her hair streaked with silver, her eyes still soft with faith. For years, they had prayed for a child. Every season they hoped, every year they waited, and every time, nothing. Abraham sighed. "Lord," he whispered into the cool air, "you have given me everything, protection, peace, blessings, but no son to carry my name. My servants have children. The herds multiply, but my home is silent." He closed his eyes, and memories flooded in. The fire, the call, the promise. He remembered God's words, "I will make you into a great nation." He opened his eyes again, looking at his wrinkled hands. "A nation, Lord? How?" "When Sarah and I are old." As he sat in silence, the world seemed to grow still. Then, the same voice that had once called him from UR spoke again, calm and clear. "Do not be afraid, Abraham. I am your protector, and your reward is great." Abraham's heart trembled. He whispered, "My Lord, what can you give me when I remain childless?" "The one who will inherit my house is Eliezer of Damascus." And then came the reply, gentle, powerful, full of love. This man will not be your heir. A son from your own body will be your heir." Abraham lifted his head, stunned. The voice continued, "Come outside." He stepped out of his tent. The night was cool, and the sand was soft under his feet. The heavens stretched endlessly above him. The voice said, "Look toward the sky and count the stars, if you can count them." Abraham looked up, millions of stars burning bright, too many to number. And then God said, "So shall your descendants be." Abraham felt his knees weaken. His heart swelled with awe. Tears welled in his eyes as he whispered, "I believe you, my Lord." And in that moment, God counted his belief as righteousness. The next morning, Abraham told Sarah about the promise. She smiled sadly, shaking her head. "My husband," she said softly, "I have prayed for years, but I am old now. My body cannot bear a child." He took her hand and said, "The Lord can do anything, Sarah." He spoke, and the stars came into being. He said it, and that is enough for me. Sarah's smile faded into a thoughtful silence. She wanted to believe, but her heart was weary from waiting. Months passed. The promise remained, but nothing changed. The days were long, and hope began to tremble. One evening, Sarah said quietly, "Perhaps the Lord means that you should have a child through Hagar." Hagar was her Egyptian servant, young, kind, and loyal. "Take her," Sarah said. "Maybe through her, we will have a son." Abraham hesitated, his heart torn. He wanted to trust God's timing, yet Sarah's eyes pleaded with him. So Hagar bore him a son, Ishmael. Abraham loved him deeply. He held the child in his arms and felt joy for the first time in years. Maybe this is what God meant, he told himself. But time would show that this was not the promise God had made. Years passed. Abraham was now 99. His beard had turned white, his body slower, but his faith still alive. One hot afternoon, as he sat outside his tent under the oaks of Mamre, 3 men appeared in the distance. Travelers, or so they seemed. Abraham rose quickly, bowing before them with respect. He didn't know who they were, but his heart felt something holy in their presence. "Please stay a while," he said warmly. "Rest under the tree. Let water be brought to wash your feet. I will bring bread for you to eat." He hurried inside. "Sarah," he called, "quickly make some bread. We have guests." She smiled and began preparing the meal. When the men sat and ate, one of them looked at Abraham and said, "Where is Sarah, your wife?" "In the tent," Abraham replied. The man smiled faintly and said, "I will surely return to you about this time next year, and your wife Sarah will have a son." From inside the tent, Sarah heard it, and she laughed softly to herself. She thought, "I am old, and my husband is old. How can I have a child now?" Then the voice said again, "Why did Sarah laugh? Is anything too hard for the Lord?" Sarah froze. Fear and awe rushed through her. She whispered, "I did not laugh." But the voice replied, "Yes, you did." Then came silence, the kind that changes everything. Abraham's heart burned with hope again. He looked toward the sky as the visitors departed, feeling that something sacred had just happened. Months turned into seasons. Sarah began to feel changes within her, life stirring where once there had been none. Tears of disbelief filled her eyes as she felt the promise living inside her. When the time came, she gave birth to a son, just as God had said. Abraham held the baby in his trembling arms, whispering, "His name will be Isaac," which means laughter. Sarah smiled through tears. "God has brought me laughter," she said, "and everyone who hears of this will laugh with me." Abraham kissed the child's forehead and lifted him toward the sky. "You are the beginning of his promise," he said softly. "Through you, generations will know the faithfulness of God." That night, as the camp fell quiet and Isaac slept beside Sarah, Abraham stepped outside once more. The stars glimmered as they had on that first night years ago, countless, bright, eternal. He knelt on the sand and whispered, "Lord, I am an old man. My hands are weak, my body tired. But you have done what seemed impossible. You turn my wife's laughter of doubt into laughter of joy. You gave life where there was none. You kept your word." The cool desert wind brushed against his face. He closed his eyes and felt peace. Faith had not been easy. It had been tested by time, silence, and human impatience. But through it all, Abraham learned something precious, that God's timing is never late, and his promises never fail. Sometimes, he thought about those long nights when he doubted, when the sky felt silent. And now, looking at Isaac's peaceful face, he realized, even in silence, God had been working. Years later, Abraham would often sit by the fire, holding little Isaac close, telling him stories of the stars. One day, he would say, "You will look at the sky and remember that each star is a promise. They shine because God said they would, and so will your faith, my son." Isaac would laugh, the sound bright and pure like music in the quiet desert. And Sarah, watching from the tent, would smile, her heart finally at rest. But God's story with Abraham was not finished. Faith that begins in obedience must one day be refined in sacrifice. One morning, before the dawn, Abraham felt a stirring in his heart, that quiet, familiar voice once more calling his name. "Abraham." He answered softly, "Yes, Lord." And the voice said, "Take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah. Offer him there as a sacrifice." Abraham's heart froze. His eyes fell on the sleeping boy beside Sarah, the boy of promise, the miracle child. He closed his eyes as the world seemed to go silent. The stars above were still shining, the same stars beneath which the promise had begun. But now they looked different, distant, sorrowful, waiting. He knew what obedience would cost him, and yet he also knew the God who had never broken a promise. Abraham whispered into the night, "You gave him to me, Lord. If you ask for him, I will not hold him back." And thus began the greatest test of faith the world would ever know. That was the night the stars became witnesses again, to a man's love, his fear, and his unshakable trust in God. For Abraham was no longer just a man who believed. He was a man whose belief would change the course of faith itself. Abraham's chest tightened. His mind raced, his soul trembled. Isaac, the child of promise, the miracle given in the fullness of time, the one through whom God had said his descendants would be counted as stars in the sky. God was asking him to surrender the very essence of his heart. He did not speak immediately. He did not move. He only knelt in silence, his forehead touching the cool sand of the tent's entrance. Tears ran down his cheeks. "O Lord," he whispered, "how can this be? How can you ask me to give back what you gave so freely?" The desert was silent, as if even the earth was holding its breath. Abraham knew, deep in his heart, that God's command was not cruel. It was a test of obedience, of faith, of trust that transcends understanding. At sunrise, Abraham rose with resolve. He went to Sarah, whose eyes were still heavy with sleep. "Sarah," he said softly, "we must prepare for a journey." She blinked, sensing something serious in his tone. "A journey? Where?" "Abraham." He hesitated, then said simply, "To a place the Lord will show us. We must obey him fully." Though Sarah's heart quivered, she saw in Abraham's face a serenity that no human fear could break. She nodded silently, trusting the God who had brought them Isaac, trusting the man who had followed God through deserts and uncertainties for decades. The journey to Moriah was arduous. Abraham rose before dawn, taking Isaac by the hand. He carried the wood for the sacrifice, while Isaac, unaware of the full gravity of the task, walked beside him with innocent curiosity. "Father," Isaac asked, "we have the wood and the fire, but where is the lamb for the offering?" Abraham forced a gentle smile. "God himself will provide, my son. Trust in him, as I trust in him." Days passed. The sun blazed overhead. The path wound through barren hills, rocky paths, and stretches of sand that tested the strength of their bodies and the patience of their hearts. Abraham spoke little. His prayers were whispered continually. "O Lord, grant me strength. Let my hands obey your will, even when my heart is torn. Isaac, sensing a heaviness in his father's heart, reached out sometimes to touch him. Abraham's hand would brush his hair back, and he would say, "All will be well, my son. God is with us." Yet every word weighed heavily, for he knew the truth. The command from God demanded a depth of surrender few could imagine. At night, Abraham would look up at the stars, the same stars that had first promised descendants innumerable as their lights. His heart ached with both hope and sorrow. "O Lord," he whispered, "you gave me this child. You promised me generations through him. How can I obey what you ask?" And in that quiet, God's presence reassured him, though Abraham could not yet see how. "Abraham, your faith is counted as righteousness. Walk forward with trust." Finally, they reached the appointed place. Abraham built an altar of stones, arranging them carefully, his hands trembling yet steadfast. He placed the wood upon the altar. Isaac, now old enough to follow instructions, helped gather stones to make the foundation. "Father," he said, "everything is ready, but where is the lamb?" Abraham's voice caught, yet he spoke firmly. "God himself will provide, Isaac. Trust him." Abraham bound his beloved son carefully, laying him gently upon the altar. Every heartbeat echoed in his chest. Every tear he had shed in the years of waiting, in the deserts, in the uncertainty, all converged in this singular moment. He raised the knife. The world seemed to stop. The wind stilled. The desert air hung heavy with expectation. And then a voice, as pure and eternal as the stars themselves, rang out. "Abraham! Abraham!" Abraham froze. "Here I am, Lord," he replied, his voice breaking. "Do not lay a hand on the boy," the voice continued. "Now I know that you fear God, seeing that you have not withheld your only son from me." Tears streamed down Abraham's face as he lowered the knife. His knees gave way, and he fell upon the sand, overwhelmed with relief, awe, and gratitude. He embraced Isaac, who, despite not fully understanding, sensed the sacredness of the moment. Then Abraham looked up and saw a ram caught in the thicket by its horns. He offered it as a sacrifice instead, obeying God's command fully. That day, Abraham learned a profound truth. Faith is not measured by comfort, by understanding, or by the absence of fear, but by surrender, complete and unwavering, to God's will. The journey back down the mountain was quiet. Abraham held Isaac close, whispering prayers of thanks. Isaac leaned against his father, sensing a depth of love that could not be broken, a love intertwined with faith. As they traveled, Abraham reflected on all that had brought them to this point: the call to leave Ur, the fire of Nimrod, the years of waiting, and the promise under the stars. Each trial had prepared him for this moment, teaching patience, obedience, and the boundless power of trust in God. When they returned to the camp, Sarah ran to meet them. Abraham told her everything. Tears and laughter mingled as she hugged Isaac and then Abraham. "Praise be to Allah," she said softly. "He has provided, and He has preserved our family, our faith, and our hearts." Abraham gazed at the sky once more. The stars shone brightly, unchanging, eternal. And in that shining light, he saw the promise renewed, not just for himself, but for generations yet unborn. Through his obedience, Abraham had become more than a man. He had become a symbol of unwavering faith, of courage, of love that obeys God even when the cost is unbearable. His story would echo through time, teaching that trust in the Almighty transforms fear into strength, silence into wisdom, and waiting into fulfillment. That night, Abraham whispered to Isaac, who was now finally old enough to understand more than just words. "Remember, my son, the stars above are not just lights. They are promises from Allah. They shine because He said they would. And just like the stars, His promises never fail." Isaac listened, wide-eyed. Sarah watched from the tent entrance, her heart full of peace. And Abraham, kneeling once more beneath the infinite sky, made a vow in his soul. No matter the trials, no matter the uncertainties, he would always walk the path of faith. The mountain of Moriah had tested him, yet it had also taught him the depth of divine love. And from that moment on, Abraham's life and the lives of countless generations would be forever marked by the unshakable trust of a man who truly believed in God. O Lord, you are the most merciful, the most powerful. You have preserved my son, my family, and my faith. May your name be exalted forever. Sarah emerged from the tent, her face soft with relief and love. She placed her hands on Abraham's shoulder. "We have witnessed a miracle, my husband," she said. "The Lord has shown us that obedience is the path to his blessings." Abraham nodded. "It is not just obedience, Sarah. It is trust, complete and unshakable. Today, we have learned what it truly means to submit our hearts to Allah." As the sun rose higher, Abraham began the journey back toward Canaan. The path was familiar, yet every step carried the weight of reflection. Each stone, each hill, seemed to echo the story of faith and surrender. During their travels, Abraham taught Isaac the lessons he had learned through years of trials. "My son," he said, "faith is not measured by ease or comfort. True faith is shown when the heart obeys Allah, even when it trembles, even when it questions." Isaac listened carefully, absorbing the wisdom of a father whose life had been a testament to divine trust. "Father," he asked softly, "will I be strong enough to follow Allah's commands like you?" Abraham smiled, placing his hand on his son's head. "If you trust him and your heart is sincere, you will be stronger than you know. Remember, the Lord never asks us to bear more than we can endure." Their journey was filled with quiet conversations, prayers, and moments of reflection. Abraham often gazed at the stars above, thinking of the promise God had made long ago. The stars, countless and eternal, reminded him of the generations yet to come, descendants who would walk in faith, spread righteousness, and bear witness to Allah's mercy. Years passed, and Abraham's family grew. Sarah bore more children, and Isaac grew into a wise and obedient young man. Abraham taught him about the ways of God, the importance of prayer, and the necessity of trusting in divine wisdom. The people around Abraham began to see him not just as a leader, but as a symbol of unwavering faith. Tribes came to him for guidance, seeking wisdom and blessings. Abraham welcomed them all, teaching that submission to Allah will bring both peace and prosperity. He would often recount the story of the fire, the call from Uar, and the ultimate test with Isaac. "These trials," he would say, "are the crucible of faith. Only through complete trust can the heart truly know the mercy of Allah." Abraham's words were not merely lessons. They were living examples of faith in action. His life demonstrated that obedience to God is never in vain, and that divine promises are fulfilled in their perfect time. One evening, as the family sat under the stars, Abraham spoke to Isaac, and the young ones gathered around him. "Look at the sky," he said. "Every star is a promise. Every promise of Allah is true, though it may seem distant or impossible. Trust in him, obey him, and you will see his mercy unfold before your eyes." The children listened, captivated by his voice, by the certainty in his eyes, and by the calm strength that radiated from him. They understood, even if only in part, that the life of their father was a story written by God's hand, a story of trust, patience, and unshakable faith. Abraham's legacy extended beyond his immediate family. His faith inspired nations, shaped communities, and created a lineage that would carry the torch of monotheism for centuries. Generations would look back and see a man who obeyed without hesitation, who trusted without question, and who loved God above all else. Even in old age, Abraham remained devoted. His prayers were constant, his gratitude endless, and his trust in God unwavering. Every morning he would rise before dawn, praising Allah and thanking him for the blessings of life, family, and faith. One day, Abraham received a vision from God, a confirmation of the covenant that had begun so many years before. "Abraham," the voice said, "your descendants will inherit the land. Through them, nations will be blessed. Your faith has been counted as righteousness, and your obedience will be remembered forever." Abraham fell to his knees, overwhelmed with humility. He had not sought glory or reward. He had only sought to obey, to trust, and to follow the path that God had set before him. He rose, his heart full of peace, and looked at Isaac. "This is not just for me, my son," he said. "It is for all who will follow in our steps. Remember that the Lord's promises are never empty. Trust him, and you will see wonders beyond imagination." Abraham's life continued with blessings and trials alike. He faced challenges, losses, and uncertainties, but his heart remained steadfast. Every step, every decision, every prayer was rooted in the knowledge that Allah's plan is perfect, even when human eyes cannot see it. Sarah passed away after many years, but Abraham remained committed to raising Isaac in the path of faith. He ensured that his family understood the importance of obedience, trust, and devotion to God. And in doing so, he cemented a legacy that would echo through the ages. As Abraham grew older, he would often sit by the fire at night, surrounded by family and followers. The desert sky stretched endlessly above, a reminder of God's infinite presence and the promises that had guided his life. He would point to the stars and say, "Each star represents a promise of Allah. They shine in the darkness to remind us that even when life seems uncertain, His word is true. Do not fear, do not doubt, only believe, and walk the path He has set for you." The children would listen, wide-eyed, as the story of faith unfolded before them. And in those moments, Abraham understood that the true fulfillment of God's promise was not only in the land, the descendants, or the blessings, but in the faith that lived within the hearts of those who would follow after him. And so, Abraham's legacy of obedience was complete. Through trials, tests, and triumphs, he had demonstrated the essence of true faith. He had left a world that was more aware of God's power, mercy, and love. And he had shown that trust, even in the most difficult moments, can shape not only a life, but generations to come. Abraham's story became a guiding light, a reminder that faith is not measured by ease or comfort, but by the courage to obey, the strength to endure, and the love to trust God above all else. Even as the sun set over the horizon, casting long shadows across the desert, Abraham's heart remained steadfast. The mountains, the stars, and the earth itself seemed to echo the same truth he had lived by all his life. Obedience to God brings blessings beyond imagination, and faith is the foundation of all that is enduring and true. And thus, the story of Abraham's life, his faith, his obedience, his unwavering trust, continued to inspire generations. His journey was far from over, for his descendants would carry forward the legacy of monotheism, righteousness, and devotion to God. The desert wind blew gently across the hills as Abraham sat under the vast sky. Time had passed, seasons had changed, yet the life of Abraham remained a testament to trust, devotion, and unwavering faith in Allah. He had seen miracles, faced trials, and raised generations to follow the path of righteousness. And now, in his old age, he reflected on the life he had lived, a life built on faith. Abraham's journey had begun with a call, a voice in the night asking him to leave his homeland, his family, and all that was familiar. It had continued through fire, through exile, through uncertainty, and through the ultimate test with his beloved son, Isaac. Each trial had shaped him, strengthened him, and defined the legacy he would leave behind. Even in his later years, Abraham continued to teach and guide. His household was filled with the sound of prayers, the laughter of children, and the soft murmur of wisdom shared with those who came seeking guidance. Travelers from distant lands would arrive at his tent, seeking advice, blessings, or simply the presence of a man whose life embodied trust in God. Abraham would often gather the children and speak of the stars. "See them," he would say, pointing to the night sky. "Countless, shining, eternal. Each star represents a promise from Allah. Just as He fulfilled His promise to me, He will fulfill His promises to you. Obey Him, trust Him, and your hearts will never be empty." He spoke of the fire of Nimrod, of the idols he had destroyed in Ur, and of the journey to Moriah. He told them of Isaac, the miracle child, and the test of obedience that had confirmed his faith. Every story carried a lesson. Faith requires patience, surrender, and trust, even when the heart trembles. Abraham's wisdom extended beyond words. His actions, his calm in adversity, and his unwavering devotion to God taught more than any sermon ever could. People came to witness his character and left transformed, carrying the light of faith to their own communities. But Abraham knew that his legacy was not only for those who were near him. God had promised him that his descendants would form nations, that through his line, countless people would be guided to worship the one true God. This promise weighed on his heart with both responsibility and humility. He prayed daily, lifting his hands toward the heavens, asking God to guide his children and grandchildren in righteousness. He would whisper, "O Lord, bless them, protect them, and grant them hearts that trust you fully. Let them walk in the path of faith, and let your guidance shine through their lives." Abraham's family grew, and Isaac matured into a strong and wise leader. Abraham ensured that his teachings, his prayers, and the lessons of obedience were instilled in him. He knew that the future of faith depended not only on miracles, but on the example of those who lived righteously. Through his lifetime, Abraham's name became synonymous with devotion, courage, and unwavering trust in God. His stories spread across lands, carried by travelers, followers, and eventually through the generations who would follow his path. Nations would look back and remember Abraham as the friend of Allah, a man whose faith shaped history. One evening, as Abraham gazed upon the horizon, he thought about the countless generations that would come from his family. He remembered the stars under which God had promised him descendants as numerous as their lights. The promise had been fulfilled in Isaac and would continue through generations, forming a lineage of prophets, leaders, and believers. Abraham whispered softly, "O Lord, I am but a servant, yet you honored me with your trust and your promises. May my family, my children, and their children never forget the path of obedience, and may your light guide them always." The night sky seemed to respond, the stars shimmering brighter as if affirming his words. Abraham felt a peace unlike any he had known before, the peace of a life well lived in complete submission to God. As he grew older, Abraham continued to travel, guide, and pray. He visited distant lands, building altars and sharing the message of monotheism. Everywhere he went, people witnessed his faith, his integrity, and his trust in Allah. His influence spread far and wide, planting the seeds of devotion in countless hearts. Even when faced with challenges, Abraham's faith never wavered. His life was a continuous demonstration that God's promises are true, that obedience brings blessings, and that trust in the Almighty transforms hearts and communities. Abraham taught that faith was not merely belief but action, a commitment that required courage, patience, and unwavering dedication. He said to his followers, "Obedience to God is the foundation of life. Trust Him in ease and in hardship, and your hearts will find peace." In his final years, Abraham gathered his family one last time. Isaac, now grown and strong, stood beside him, holding the torch of the promise. Abraham looked at the faces of his children, grandchildren, and the families who had gathered and spoke. "Remember this always. Allah is the one who guides, protects, and fulfills His promises. Walk in His path, trust in His wisdom, and obey His commands. The blessings of faith will shine through your lives, as they have in mine." He blessed them one by one, lifting his hands in prayer. "O Lord, grant them wisdom, courage, and devotion. Let their hearts always seek you, and let your guidance be the light that never fades from their lives." And so, Abraham's life drew to a close, not as an ordinary man, but as a prophet, a father of nations, and a symbol of eternal faith. His journey from Ur to Canaan, from trials to triumphs, had left a legacy that would transcend time, inspiring countless generations to come. Even after Abraham's passing, his influence continued. His descendants carried forward the message of monotheism. Prophets arose from his lineage, guided by the principles he had lived by: obedience, trust, and love for Allah. Communities flourished under the light of faith he had exemplified, and the story of Abraham, the man who believed God, became immortal in the hearts of humanity. The mountains, the stars, and the deserts of his life witnessed his unwavering devotion. They told the story of a man who trusted God completely, who obeyed even when it seemed impossible, and who left behind a legacy of faith that would shape history forever. Abraham's life is a reminder that true faith is active, enduring, and transformative. It is not measured by the absence of challenges, but by the courage to obey, the patience to wait, and the trust to surrender everything to God's will. And as the night skies stretched infinitely over the land, one could imagine Abraham, at peace, looking at the stars, knowing that his faith had not only fulfilled God's promise, but had created a chain of trust and devotion that would continue for eternity. Abraham, the man who believed God, had become more than a name. He was a beacon of hope, a model of unwavering trust, and a guide for all who seek the path of faith. His story teaches that obedience brings blessings, trust shapes destiny, and faith can move hearts across generations. The legacy of Abraham lives on, in every heart that submits to God, in every soul that trusts in his promises, and in every generation that follows the path of righteousness. Through Abraham, humanity learns the most profound lesson of all. Faith in God transforms lives, shapes nations, and endures forever.